I'm Anne Applebaum, a staff writer at The Atlantic.
I'm Peter Pomerantsev, a senior fellow at the SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University.
Coming this September, a new podcast from The Atlantic, Autocracy in America.
I thought, surely we're not that far gone. And then I realized maybe we are, actually.
There's a common perception that democracy ends with a battle, soldiers in the streets, a coup d'etat, the fall of a government.
Modern-day authoritarians do not come into power by brute force.
No, democracy's lost one little step at a time.
Modern-day authoritarians come to power by winning democratic elections. But then once they get into power, tilting all the levers of power in their favor.
We know this because we have studied how autocracies take hold.
My nightmare is that fascism comes to America, but it's marching under the banner of freedom.
We've reported from places where freedoms are curtailed and corruption flourishes.
If you are accused of something, you're going to be proven guilty. There are no exceptions.
We've seen with our own eyes what happens when democracy gives way to authoritarianism.
When we look at America today, right now, we see a place where the slide to autocracy has already begun.
It's not some distant future. It's the present. The evidence can be found in the tightening grip of conspiracy theories.
And never in a million years would I have thought that somebody would have accused me of shredding ballots from the 2020 election, feeding them to chickens, and then burning the chickens to cover the evidence.
It can be seen in the misuse of investigations and the fragility of the courts.
I just kept saying, when do we get to the part where the facts come out?
There are signs of autocracy in the growth of dark money and the lack of transparency in politics.
This is a beast that is stalking America's political landscape.
To understand it, you've got to look around the world.
The struggle for a transition to democracy in Venezuela, we are fighting a global fight.
And you have to look to history.
You go to the records and you'll see that the voters of that election voted in alphabetical order. Can you figure that out?
That's pretty sloppy cheating.
No, it's not sloppy. It's blatant.
I'm Anne Applebaum, a staff writer at The Atlantic.
I'm Peter Pomerantsev, a senior fellow at the SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University.
Coming this September, a new podcast from The Atlantic, Autocracy in America.
Your seats. The program will begin momentarily. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones. The program is about to begin. The Atlantic promotes and protects the free exchange of ideas through prohibiting the physical or virtual disruption, shouting down, blocking, or suppressing an invited speaker's right to speak. Please note, disruptions of this nature will result in removal from the Atlantic Festival. Thank you for your support of this event. Please welcome the Atlantic CEO Nicholas Thompson.
Hello, I'm back. We are going to have an excellent afternoon and some deep conversations about AI. Before I get started, I want to thank WK Kellogg, our sponsor, supporter. Without them, no festival. Thank you for helping bring our journalism to life. Most interesting thing in tech, I want to talk about the biggest issue in technology, which is the question about why, over the last generation, it seemed as though digital technology empowered authoritarians more than democracies. At the end of the Cold War, everybody thought that the internet and digital technology would help democracies, and that doesn't seem to have happened. Obviously, the rise of authoritarian states and dictators and decline of some democracies is not wholly or even largely or even mostly a story of technology. There are other factors, like the Iraq War, etc. But to the extent it is a story of technology, I've been talking to a bunch of people about it recently, and I think there are four very important factors. If I were to rank them, number one, the speed at which information flows. During the Cold War, there was an assumption that more information would likely lead to more democracy, and that was true in, say, Czechoslovakia in 1985. But when you get to the United States in, say, 2016, the speed of information overwhelmed us. And the way that it led to social media sorting algorithms overwhelmed some of the ways our democracy works. So that's reason number one, too much information. Reason number two is that at the end of the Cold War and in those early wonderful years, the 1990s, it seemed like it would be impossible for authoritarian states to control technology. As Bill Clinton famously said, China trying to censor the internet is like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. Well, they nailed that Jell-O pretty effectively. Third reason, income inequality. Societies with more income inequality have a harder time sustaining democracies, and it turned out that this technology, counter to what many people thought 25 years ago, led to income inequality getting worse because it concentrated power in people with graduate degrees, college degrees, urban areas, a small number of companies. It led to a widening of income inequality, certainly in large democratic countries. And then the fourth reason was the weakening of the press. What happened is Facebook and Google built a better advertising model. In the year 2000, if you wanted to sell golf balls, you put an ad in Golf Magazine. Now, if you want to sell golf balls, you just target to somebody on Facebook who has joined a golf club. They built a better way of selling advertising, and some media companies, like The Atlantic, with live events and other things, have been able to succeed financially, but it has been very hard. Okay, so now here's the big question. In the age of AI, what happens to those four factors? And those, I think, are some of the biggest questions we have to face, and it's not clear. It is possible on the first one, the overwhelming amount of information, that as I talked about yesterday, with AI able to counter conspiracy theories, maybe AI will actually be helpful. Maybe it will make it much worse because you won't know whether you're talking to a bot or a human, but it is possible that discourse works better. Maybe in an age of AI, it is harder for totalitarian states to control their people. And it's very interesting that one of the reasons why these generative AI models appeared here was because China was so scared of them. Maybe there is a counterweight in AI to the centralizing tendencies of technology and dictatorships. With income inequality, the signs are pretty good at the beginning, that AI is actually a tool that is really helpful for people who are making less, and in fact more helpful than for people who are making more. Many of the early economic studies suggest that it could have the opposite effect of the last digital revolution, and on the news media, God willing, we'll be able to use it effectively and as a great tool. So my hope is that unlike the last era of technology, this next one is one that empowers democracy more than authoritarianism. And that's the most interesting thing in tech.
For a conversation on prioritizing equity in AI innovation, please welcome Miriam Vogel, President and CEO of EqualAI and Chair of the National AI Advisory Committee, with Adrienne LaFrance, Executive Editor of The Atlantic.
Hi, thank you all so much for being with us, and thank you in particular I want to start, well, first I'll start by saying that we will have time for questions in the end. So as you're listening, start thinking of what you want to ask, and I'll warn you again before we get there. But for us to start, I would love for you to situate us, sort of in the broadest possible terms, to help us sort of think about what, how consequential this technology is. And I'll give you some options. You can tell me how wrong or right I am. But, is AI the equivalent of, have we discovered fire? Is this the wheel? Is this the printing press? Is it the internet? Like, how do you situate it in tech history in terms of how big this moment is?
Adrienne, I think what's interesting about AI is it's yes to all of the above. I do think we are in the middle of an AI revolution. I do think we're still early days, and we have yet to discover so many of its capabilities in the way that it's going to have us rethink our standard organizations, our standard operating procedures. But it's really, it's an open question right now, both as to how much it will change and who will be participating. And so that's why I'm so thrilled we're having this conversation, because this is still a moment when we can make sure that we're writing the course and that more people are able to influence how it plays out.
I want to get into that, especially this question of what writing the course even looks like and all of the things that you're most focused on. But before I do that, I'd love to hear, and this is a question I find myself asking people a lot, just to kind of get a sense of like how AI is moving it through culture and people's lives. Where are the use cases for you? Like, where do you find yourself most using AI day to day or week to week?
I love asking that question too. I'd love to hear your answer as well. It's really fun to see who's using it and the ways that that people are really surprising you and surprising themselves. I think of it as a great set of interns. It provides a wonderful first draft at that dreaded moment when you're staring at the blank page, starting an article, starting any kind of writing assignment. You can give it a prompt, tell it what you're looking for, tell them who your audience is, and it's not going to be a perfect document. It's a great first document. I've used it in a sad moment, trying to help my husband when he was dealing with the death of his father, doing a first draft of an obituary. It was really helpful to be able to have that starting place, and reassuring for him when I put in some of the prompts to see someone able to use a machine to understand what they were feeling. Obviously, the machine was not feeling, but it could understand how to turn those prompts into a good description of how he was feeling.
Right, and obviously more iterative than you could easily Google, like, a template for a obituary or a template for a thank you note, and be inspired that way. But it can be much more iterative and potentially personal too. So tell us a little bit about what it is that you're most focused on in your job and sort of the questions that you're most preoccupied by.
Yeah, I would say, to start off, level set, I am AI net positive. I'm excited for all the opportunities that AI is and will bring for us, but I'm also focused on the fact that we're at a critical moment. We're at a crossroads where we can make sure that AI does bring the opportunity that we're thinking and hoping it will. And if not, if we do not focus on that, if we don't put enough of the safeguards in place, we'll realize our worst fear. And not just because of an AI takeover, but too many people are afraid of AI right now. Most audiences we talk to understandably feel intimidated. They feel like it's a foreign object in a foreign language, which it is. But if we continue on that path and don't do a better job of engaging more of you all in the development and use of AI, we will live out this worst fear where it's built by and for this homogenous group.
Right, and I mean, so to be transparent, I would characterize myself as AI net skeptical. That's probably just because I'm a journalist. And I've written about AI for a long time and been thinking about these questions. And it strikes me that no one really knows how afraid we should be. And so I think that's an open question. I mean, I'd love to hear more about how you think about that question. But one thing I wanted to ask you, because so much of what you hear from people who are most optimistic about this is the sort of like, it's going to enhance our humanity and it's human-centered. And I'd love to hear you just sort of talk about, like, how is that not a contradiction in terms?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful if we look at the use cases we've already seen. So when we have let AI be built by teams where there's not as much diversity. We've seen systems that scale past discrimination. If you're looking at mortgage lending, if you're looking at hiring, if you're looking at healthcare allocation, we all have specific use cases already in existence where, unchecked, it turns out that it was providing recommendations that were really harmful, really limiting who was able to benefit from all those different opportunities. But if we look at how it can be better, if we're looking at what it looks like if we do this right, you can see examples like AI for All, which does a great job of bringing computer science and technology to underserved populations and to young people in particular in those communities. We see the types of AI systems they've created to benefit their communities. When you think of AI, you have to think about each human touch point along the AI system pipeline. From the design phase, from thinking about what solution you want to solve for. And right now, too few people have that opportunity to create an AI solution. So from the get-go, you're going to have a limited group and biases in the solutions that we're solving for. That continues on when we're developing the AI system, when we're training it, because so much of our data, as we know, contains biases and other types of harms. And then the testing phase, it's another opportunity for us to turn an area where there's a human touch point, where there could be bias and harms, and really open it up. Think about who are the different end users. And when we've done that, when we have case studies of where we've empowered different communities, these students, for example, were able to identify higher levels of toxicity in their backyards than in neighboring wealthy backyards, because they knew to ask that question. They were able to provide an algorithm to reroute ambulances. One of the students' grandmother sadly passed, and waiting for an ambulance after a stroke. Well, she was able to use an algorithm to help use need and geography to better route algorithms for ambulance distribution. So when we've seen cases where we've been more thoughtful about who the end users could be, we're able to identify who could be harmed if we're not opening the conversation to them, and how more people can benefit when we do.
A lot of very smart people, you obviously included, are thinking about these questions. And it strikes, well, I'm curious first to hear how you think about the level of sophistication we've reached, whether it's within the tech industry or academia or nonprofits or government or wherever, in terms of addressing them well. I ask in part because I think, at least a decade ago or more, we already knew that about, for example, racial biases in facial recognition software, or biases in algorithms that when you Google the term CEO, you only get pictures of white men back, or those kinds of examples have been around for a long time. And it seems like the level of sophistication in our understanding of where we can go wrong has certainly improved. At the same time, I'm curious for your sense of when things can go unexpected. So one example that comes to mind, which many of you probably heard about, was with Google's Gemini, where prompts were able to, for U.S. senators from the 1800s, and all of the images generated were people of color, when of course, in reality, U.S. senators from the 1800s were not people of color, they were white men. And so anyway, I guess what I'm asking is, how can you take the best intentions and a higher level of sophistication and see around corners that might lead you to a place that you weren't expecting in trying to address real problems?
That gets back to the root issue here, which is that we need to make sure that AI is built by and for a broader cross-section of our population. Every individual can only imagine as broadly as their experience and creativity allows, and there's going to be a ceiling at the end of that, no matter how much we try to get around it or how many ChatGPT prompts we try to use. So the only way around this is to bring more people into the fold. The only way that we can make sure that we avoid some of the problems we've already seen is to make sure that you have more people at each phase who can ask those questions and help you understand, who is this system really built for? What is the use case it's really designed for, so that we can answer the third important question, which is, for whom could this fail?
And I'm curious too, for your sense of navigating this culturally. I'm thinking about, for instance, you have really influential figures in tech. Mark Andreessen comes to mind, who wrote a manifesto where he described among his list of enemies were people doing trust and safety work in tech or responsible AI. I don't know that he used responsible AI as a term, but it speaks to this kind of work. And I wonder if you feel that tension in your work, or just sort of what you're observing in the culture as we all try to figure out what the future looks like.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, it's hard to argue that responsible AI is controversial, but the truth is you're spot on. It is the place in the company that seems to be limiting progress because you're going to ask questions, and that's going to take time. So I think it's really incumbent upon us. There's no way around this than making sure that we all are savvy consumers, that we all are demanding that these steps be in place. And part of that is through regulation. You know, regulation is a dirty word, but there's a key role here to make sure that at the end of the day that we trust these systems. They won't be used if we don't trust them, and we need to make sure they deserve our trust. So I think we need to rethink the brand of how we currently perceive regulation, and we need to make sure that we're all asking for this responsibility. I think often it's talked about as ethics and ethical AI, and I think that's hard. It's a very high ethical bar to reach, particularly if you're thinking about how this plays out differently in each culture. Even take the term transparency. We all want transparency in our AI. Each culture is going to have a different lens into what that means. And when you're building AI and you've got an engineering degree, how are you going to answer these historically age-old questions on your own while delivering the goods at scale within the time constraints that your C-suite demands and that your shareholders are expecting? And so I think that there's a real role for us all to play, making sure that we're defining what it means to be a responsible actor and holding companies accountable to make sure that those safeguards are in place.
So I want to get to regulation in a second because you mentioned it, but first, when you talk about defining what it means to be a responsible actor, are there any companies today that you think are being responsible, or are they mostly, I mean, how would you, where are we today in terms of that aspiration?
Yeah, well, I'm fortunate. I work in a bubble because at EqualAI, our whole purpose is to support companies who want to be responsible AI leaders. So there really is great work happening. And one of the challenges is it's not defined. So part of what our job is, I hope EqualAI is out of business at some point, but right now we need to help companies align on what it means to be a responsible AI actor. Until there's a global landscape or a national understanding of what it means, not just in principle, but in operation level, what does it mean to be a responsible AI actor? We're going to need to find spaces for people to come together to help define what that looks like. So yes, I get to work with companies like PepsiCo that has put deep thought into how to use AI to help the small mom and pop shops that they work with. They might not look for AI solutions and they might not be able to afford them. So they are able to provide that infrastructure so that when these small grocery stores or marts that are ordering their products need to understand supply chain or order thresholds, they're able to benefit from AI predictive skills. They're able to use it in farming for sustainable practices. They're able to use it for their truck drivers to create the best, most efficient, effective routes. And the other place that is really important where they're investing, and I hope we can, through regulation and through public demand and otherwise, create more of a need and understanding of what it means, is with upskilling. They're doing a lot of investment in their employees, which they benefit from because they're getting the loyalty of their employees, and they now have sophisticated employees who understand what AI is and how it can and will help them and the business.
So let's get into the question of regulation. What should that look like? And how much, to be extra blunt about it, because this is the question I ask myself, how much faith do you have in the government that they are equipped with the level of sophistication required to do this right, both to protect people, but also to avoid infringing on, maybe free speech rights or other areas where we've seen regulation of the internet space arguably be up for debate as to whether it's a good thing?
Yeah, fair question. Recent history. perhaps doesn't bode well. But if we look at the longer lens of history, I think we will not get it perfect, but we will do more. I mean, look at the sophistication. I'm sure in your coverage, you've seen such a depth of sophistication as compared to where we were from policy staff across the globe and members of Congress here and in numerous countries, where through the AI Insight Forum and through a lot of work and commitment by those in the policy space to really upskill themselves and understand what it means to be doing AI policy in a way that can support innovation and not hinder it, but putting those key guardrails in place. I think we need to look at how we can build trust in AI systems. We need to look at other industries and examples as to how we've done that effectively in the past. And we don't have to go far to see how we've done this again, not perfectly, but well. If we look at the fact that we all came here today in a car or took planes, trains, none of us would have gotten in a plane or in a car if we did not think we'd get out the other side safely. And I really believe that's because we know there's regulations, there's safeguards, there's safety protocols in place. And we might not know what all of those regulations are. We might not be familiar with the standards or what they mean, but we know and can trust that they're there enough to trust this innovation with our lives and the lives of our loved ones. And so we'll have to figure out what that means in the AI space. I have a few ideas of where I think we should start, but I do think there's been significant progress in the last few years.
Given that we don't know, the sort of black box problem as people describe it, that we know broadly that the way generative AI works is by predicting, or if you're looking at like a large language model, by predicting the words that will come next based on a very large amount of data that already exists. But we don't know exactly how it comes up with what it comes up with or why. Obviously, there's questions about hallucination or just what we might think of as fabrication. Given that, I mean, it just strikes me that it may be much harder than inspecting a plane engine or deciding where airbags should go, and it's a useful example just in terms of regulation that people thought wasn't possible then was. But I do wonder about the sort of unknowability of some of the aspects of this technology that will make regulation difficult.
Yeah, you're right. To be fair, we're going to have to rethink, as we started this conversation saying, we're going to have to rethink some of our organizations and standard operating procedures, for sure. But we can we can present hypos. We can do modeling, and we can do our best estimates, as we do in so many ways with drug safety and other areas where we're not going to get a perfect answer, and we have had to rethink it for this new innovation. But at the end of the day, we have enough of the questions in place. We are clear on the cadence of when those questions need to be asked, and we have clarity on who is asking those questions. So I think if we look at the top line of how we've answered these questions, that's going to give us a good framework as to where to start, knowing that we're going to have to be flexible because we're learning as we go. So that is a fair point of the complexity here. But I think as we're thinking about how this plays out, how we ensure the guardrails, we have to keep our eyes on the place where a lot of this will play out, and that's in the courtrooms.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about jobs, just because I know a big thing that you've focused on in your work is access to this technology so that people aren't left behind as it develops. One thing I think about, looking across the history of technological advances, of course you see inevitably that jobs change, certain job categories go away. I think about computers used to be a term just to describe human work, and there were elevator operators and telephone operators, and so that is, I think, not to sound callous about it, but it's certainly a historical fact about technological advances. And so I wonder how you think, if you're thinking about, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 50 years from now, I'm very curious to know what categories of jobs you think might dramatically change, but also how do we as a society deal with that? Because even if AI ultimately isn't that good, verdict's still out, but if it is, there's still going to be dramatic change along the way.
I think we need two things. First of all, I think we need to ask our government to ensure we have AI literacy. I think we need to make sure that more of our population is equipped to not just participate, but thrive in an AI economy. Make sure our students are all, it's a digital literacy, but it's a little different. It's critical thinking. It's knowing How have you used AI today? Too many people think that they have only used AI if they've tried Bard or Gemini or ChatGPT. They don't realize that their news feed is powered by an algorithm. So there's a general level of understanding and awareness that we need to rely on the government to help define and standardize. And another government role in helping to answer that good question is really getting a good, solid study. Where do we see the world going? How do we expect the jobs to be playing out in the next 5 years? We can guess. And we know that critical judgment, management, that some of these skills will only become more important, not less. But we need, there are great studies out there that we've seen, but whether it's a public-private partnership or a comprehensive government study, we need to really understand the landscape so that we can plan accordingly.
I'll mention here that in about 5 minutes we'll go to your questions, so keep thinking about any questions you want to ask. I'm going to pepper you with a few more in the meantime. One question I wanted to ask you is, you've talked in other forums about how important it is to drive government procurement as a way to help promote the innovation of the technology itself. So, and you've just now mentioned, public-private partnerships. Do we also need, one thing I've thought about a lot is how so much of the development of this technology is in the hands of a powerful few. So you have many, many AI companies, including startups, but also some really powerful big name ones who are driving a lot of what's happening. And I've wondered, do we need it would be great if universities had the money to do more AI research, for example, or do we need even the NASA equivalent for AI, that sort of agency? And I'm curious how you think about, in an ideal world, how would innovation in AI work across institutions and companies?
Yeah, well, so much to take on there. I'll take it piece by piece. How should it, carefully, but it should happen. I think one thing for us to be clear on is abstinence is not an option when it comes to AI. It will come to a home and theater and office and government near you, and already has. And so part of it is understanding the reality we're working in and then planning accordingly. Yeah, I think you're referencing, I'm privileged to chair the National AI Advisory Committee, and some of our members did great work that we all discussed and deliberated on and made part of our reports on procurement. That's an interesting animal, bringing these antiquated systems of government procurement to deal with these innovations. And then helping not only understand what questions need to be asked, but then what do you do with that information? How does a procurement officer then follow up? And what do they do if they are getting answers they're not comfortable with? What kind of authorities, power, understanding do they have to take action? So it's a really good question you ask, but I think that it's important for us to deal with the reality of, first of all, surveying. I would say, how do we deal with it? If you're in government, if you're in an organization, in your own home, you should really ask honestly, where are we using AI today? And then plan accordingly, because you'd be surprised at all the ways that it is currently in your lives and that you'll want to take ownership of and ask some important questions.
Well, and you pointed out, right, it is already embedded in so much of the day-to-day software we use. So it is already here in so many ways. At the same time, there are these interesting sort of there's this spikiness to the moments where I think we, at least, regular civilians get a glimpse of a leap forward. I think the first GPT was a moment where people were like, whoa, I didn't realize that was possible. There have been some others, certainly with imaging and videos. I'm curious for you, as someone who's paying such close attention to this space, what was the last development, because sometimes it's months between these developments, right? And then you inevitably have people who are like, oh, AI is just hype. What was the last one, or the last software you encountered, or whatever it was, that really blew your mind? If you can think of something.
I think it's the subtle nuance that you can learn from when you use one of these models. I asked for some questions for an interview I was doing, and then I asked for it to change it to my voice. So for me, seeing it captured things about how I talk that I hadn't recognized before, when I've done that for other speakers as well. Now, you've got a whole set of other questions there about IP ownership and that sort of thing, but understanding what you can learn from these models, there are other places in history where you can go. You can understand, what McDonald's is selling in France versus the US. And it's really interesting to see those subtleties across regions and understand when someone's put deep thought into it, what you come up with. And now we have that power in our hand to come out seconds later with these kinds of nuances to understand the patterns that we hadn't seen before.
I'm going to ask one more before we go to your questions. I'm curious what you think it will mean culturally, even like existentially, for us to live in a world, and maybe we're already there, where you really don't know for sure that something is real unless you're like a image, a video, certainly audio, unless you're face to face. Like how will our lives change as a result of this new reality coming into being?
I mean, I think you're right. I think in some ways we're already there. And that's why people understandably feel this fear. They don't feel prepared to know, to be able to distinguish. I think we all need to be able to take this authority, to have the agency to ask the questions, is this real? To be thinking about what was the use case, am I part of the intended audience? I mean, that's where I get really afraid if we have this false trust. You know, for many of the years I've been working at EqualAI, we've been doing this for 6 years, I was dealing with this implicit bias that users were feeling that it's computer science, so it's right. Not understanding, well, right for what question and based on what information. So now we're in a place where people are back on their heels, they're feeling more fearful, and trying to make sure that people feel equipped to ask the questions, to understand that they still do have autonomy here. They still do have agency to be asking these questions and to be understanding, is this system safe for them? Is the prediction that this AI is giving them, whether it's hiring somebody or taking a trip, you know, is this safe for me? Is this right for me?
All right. We'll go to your questions if you have them, and there's, I think, is someone with a microphone, but it's hard to see out there. I do see hands coming up. Maybe I'll just call on people. I'm sorry, it's not. Oh, here you are. Yes, great. So if you could walk over to the microphone, that'd be great. Sorry for the confusion.
Wonderful. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for being here. This is great. The idea of widening the net of who's making critical decisions about the rollout of frontier models has been talked about and floated around quite a bit. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are, respectively, on one pretty radical proposal that is the proposal of platform democracy, of including sort of randomly selected pools of users to gather for weeks at a time and make decisions in citizen assembly styles that are then binding within the decision-making process of tech companies, Meta, X, whatever it is, and having that as an alternative to hold and check and power tech CEOs in a way that's very different from just changing hiring practices.
It's a great question. I mean, I just as someone who's covered this realm, I think it's a lovely idea, and I can't imagine a world in which tech companies would agree to it. But I may be wrong. But it's a really interesting idea. I don't know if you have other.
Well, it's interesting to think about this question in the existence of authorities that we currently have and what those limitations are. I would say, I don't know if that's a place where regulations could make that happen. I think there's questions about regulatory authority there. But I would say it's in all of our best interest for us to realize and help anyone who doesn't realize recognize that they need to have multi-stakeholder perspectives, that their AI will fail and not be trusted if people are not feeling that there's a multi-stakeholder perspective included in its design, development, implementation. So I think really we kind of flip the script and think about our demands, our expectations, and we make clear that AI is better when it works for more of us. And if that's not enough of an incentive for you, again, that's where the liability comes in. We had a paper come out this week in an NYU Law Journal looking at AI and the law, and there's been a 6 times uptick in AI litigation in the past 6 years. I predict that doubles in half that time.
Thank you.
All right, in the interest of time, let's go to the next question.
Hi, thank you. Miriam, you used a word earlier when you were talking about AI, that it understood what your husband was feeling, which I think is not totally right, maybe, but it kind of, people use it a lot, and it kind of is taken by some to mean they're like sentient beings, which obviously they're not. But I guess I'm wondering how far, there was AI sessions last year, people were talking about how long until it kind of becomes more like a sentient and can actually think like a sentient entity. We saw a session yesterday with Ethan Mollick, I guess, who mentioned that GPT 3.5 to 4.0, they've gone from being able to get 63% on the GRE to 95%. So with as quick as the technology is moving, and thinking about regulation and then just our jobs, you're kind of at the cutting edge. How quickly do you think it's going, and how far are we from it being able to think more on its own, subvert regulation, and then maybe do a lot of our jobs? I mean, is that something you think about? Is that?
Yes, and thank you for this opportunity to clarify, because it sounds like I misspoke or was misunderstood. I do not think it's sentient. I do not think it understood my husband's feelings, particularly because he wasn't even the one interacting with it. But no, I don't think it has that capability. I think it was able to capture, but it was through predictive analytics and modeling and all the data it had trained on. So two answers. Sentience is not something that I currently am thinking about or believe is at least on the horizon, but I do think that this rate of change will continue to increase exponentially.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Nikita. I'm currently a student studying artificial intelligence, and you said, you brought up a lot of points specifically about the questions we asked regarding artificial intelligence, and I love the points you made, especially regarding how everyone has a hand in it. It's learning from all of us, not all of us are alone in that. So if you could, and I especially wanted to focus on the equity part, how can us as a society, all having a hand in this artificial intelligence learning and whatnot, how can we utilize it in a way that we engage with it, each one of us, in a way that it'll, of course, continue to grow, but we can utilize it to help us as a society grow in being more, I'm thinking more the ethics of it, and helping us as a society continue like teaching the AI to use ethics in its way.
Thank you for that question. I think one thing we all need to be doing is trying it. If you have not tried these large language models, you should try it, because it will open your eyes as to these amazing capabilities. It will also help you clarify that it is not magic and that it is not perfect and that it will have limitations. And that's really helpful for you to have that baseline understanding. I think for all of us using it, again, it gets back to those questions of for whom was this created, what was the use case, and for whom could this fail? And we need to make sure companies are asking those same questions. At EqualAI, we have on our website some different ways that we try to make it useful and understandable. We try to have products for simplifying this process. We have an algorithmic assessment impact tool that was built on the brilliant NIST risk management framework that you can download and use and get a series of questions based on their really in-depth work at your disposal. Also, we've tried to just help define top level, what's good AI hygiene? What should we be expecting of all the companies and organizations using AI? And you'll see it's really interesting that it really comes down to good governance. Do you have accountability? Do you have somebody in charge in the C-suite who's taking accountability for these decisions, for this budget, for the concerns that come up? Do you have a standard operating procedure in place that's been well communicated? Are you documenting what you're testing and when? Are you auditing to make sure that, as Adrienne points out, it's going to change as we go, but we can be asking questions in a regular cadence to keep apprised of if it's veering off in a direction we didn't mean for it to.
We have time for one more quick question.
Yes. You mentioned AI literacy. We now know that public education has become an ideological and political battlefield. Should we have uniform AI literacy standards for pre-K through higher education?
Great question.
Such a great question. Yes. That's a nice thing about AI right now. It is bipartisan. You will, in all of the conversations I go to, all the conferences we convene, every conversation, it's either apolitical or bipartisan. So I do think we have this window where we can help define how we want to make sure that our next generation thrives, and realizing that our economy depends on it, our national security depends on it, our leadership and democracy depend on it. So a hard task, I realize, but I do think we have an opportunity in a moment where we can make that happen.
I'm so sorry. What I will say is that this is a huge area of focus for us at The Atlantic, and my email address, which I'll give you, is adrienne@theatlantic.com. If you want to email it to me, I will get you an answer. And in seriousness, would love to know what people are wondering about in this realm, because it's a huge preoccupation of mine and ours. And thank you so much for being here, and thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you, Adrienne.
For a session produced by our underwriter, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, on democratizing AI for our children's future, please welcome Alondra Washington, Chief Transformation and Organizational Effectiveness Officer at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, with The Atlantic's Nicholas Thompson.
All right, hello everybody. I just want to confirm that is actually Adrienne's email address. She was not lying. You can send her anything you want. Alondra, it is great to be here with you. We had a very fun dinner, spicy dinner, arguing, not literally, the food was not spicy, but interesting dinner arguing about AI till late in the evenings. That was wonderful.
That's great, thank you.
All right, let's get cracking. We're going to talk about AI and racial equity. We're going to talk about some of the huge issues surviving around AI. But before we get into that, I know that you believe, and the Kellogg Foundation believes, that racial healing is the first step towards racial equity. So tell me a little bit about your philosophy, the Foundation's philosophy, and let's get it started from there.
At the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, when we refer to racial healing, we're really talking about a journey and a process where people are able to come together, to speak their truth, and to hear from one another about the issues that are most impacting them in relationship to systemic racism and oppression. And what does that look like when you're able to bring communities together to think about ways that they bridge the divides and they unpack some of the deeply held beliefs that they may have from one another. And so with this racial equity and racial healing process, it really is looking at ways that we can restore communities back to wholeness, to act together in addressing those issues that most impact them, their families, and communities.
And what is some of your most interesting work to do that? What specifically have you done to bring about that challenge?
Well, many things. Our grant funding actually supports communities around the world and in the nation to actually do that. Then we do an event called National Day of Racial Healing. We've been celebrating this event for about 8 years now, and it helps to support communities to come together the day after the Martin Luther King holiday on a Tuesday to look at ways that they can start to heal together and unpack some of the issues that they are recognizing in their community as ways to address racism and oppression.
And then you recently released a report called Lighting Up the Future for Children. So tell me a little bit about what that is and why it's important.
Super excited about this tool and this report. This report was produced in conjunction with our partner Institute for the Future. And it's looking at how do we create a child-centric future for children. We had an opportunity to do a year-long listening session with over 2,000 community partners and voices, really through extensive research and insight, listening at what it is that it's impacting children and what will be impacting them in the future. What is that ecosystem? And AI was one of those future forces that definitely came up as it relates to that ecosystem.
And people, I assume, are just super excited. They think it'll be perfect, everything will be great, nobody's scared, nobody's worried, it's going to be awesome for our kids all the way around. Is that right?
Partially. People are excited, and they do think that it's going to be amazing innovations that come out of this space. They are looking forward to the opportunities that exist, but along with those opportunities come risk. And those risks they identified, number one, was around access, right? Access to the tool, access to the knowledge. What does that look like in communities of color, in communities that have been historically marginalized? We saw that exacerbated when we dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic and thinking about inequities in technology. The other piece that they talked about was looking at economic opportunity. What does it mean to really think about the economic opportunity in communities of color? And will AI exacerbate the racial gaps that exist, wealth gaps that exist in communities, or will it help to restore and repair those gaps? So, you know, super excited about many things that are happening, definitely concerned about the risks.
So the first step to solve that would be to make sure that everybody has access, that everybody can access these tools. But also to make these tools good, because if everybody can access them and they're bad, that's really not so helpful. So tell me about which step there you want to work on the most.
Bias in the tools. And so for us, it really is thinking about ways that the, you know, concerns around the algorithms, concerns around the modeling, and how are you using a racial equity lens in relationship to that. Our communities are thinking about how do we ensure that we are not perpetuating the biases in this tool intentionally, unintentionally, and ensuring that we are not reinforcing the negative stereotypes that we often see in the narrative.
So one of your challenges, getting everybody online, but then also working with the big AI companies, working with the people who deploy the tools, and making sure that the biases aren't built in, making sure that the biases are erased from the models. What else are you trying to do in that?
We are also trying to make sure that the voice of community is showing up. And so how do people become proximate to community? How are they engaging leaders in community? At the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, we believe that people in community have the inherent capacity to solve their own problems. And so how are we ensuring that we are going to community and really lifting up the voice, the concern, the wisdom, and the innovation that we know we can find in community?
Let me ask you a question that came up last night and that you and I have talked about before. So I keep a list of like the unanswered questions in AI, the things in AI that people disagree on, right? And some of those are my tech series. One of them is, in the future, you use an AI model for a long time, and you're stuck on a desert island. Will you be smarter or dumber than you would have been if you hadn't had all that time with the AI model? What is your theory on this?
And I said to you, it depends. And I think it depends on several different factors, but one of the main ones is, especially if you look at a child that's 5 years old now, 12 years from now, 13 years from now, how are they actually more competent in this particular space, and how is it being measured? And how are we ensuring that we understand the impact on the child? And so it depends. And I think it's when we use that racial equity lens to really think about the tools, how they land in community, how they land in education, how you're thinking about instructional pedagogy around this work, there's work to do in this space.
But you wouldn't be doing this work if you weren't optimistic that it would make everybody better, because you wouldn't be trying to get everybody access to a tool if it's going to make things worse, right? So you've got to be net optimistic on this desert island question.
I would say net, and I would say from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation's perspective, you know, our 94-year history of existence, we've been working in education. And so we've seen how technology has influenced education. And we want to make sure as we're moving forward in this space that we're getting it right and we're getting better at it.
What should the folks in this room, the folks at this festival, what should they be doing to help bring the world towards a more inclusive AI and a more accessible AI?
A couple of things. We invite you and everyone to come and have a conversation around the map of the decade, to think about those ecosystems that are impacting children, the blend of AI and climate change. You know, those are the things that communities were talking about. Use the tool. You can download the tool at our website, wkkf.org, and have conversations in your community about the future of children. The next thing that we do, we invite everyone to join us in our National Day of Racial Healing celebration next year. It's the Tuesday after the Martin Luther King celebration holiday. Join us in realizing how you can actualize racial healing in your communities and bring a collective effort toward systemic change around racism and oppression.
But they should definitely download the tool before then, though. So tell me a little bit. So somebody here goes on, they go on your website, they download the tool. What happens next? How do we get from downloading the tool to...
I would say once you download that tool, take a look at it. See where there are real partnerships that you can forge in community. Civic organizations, nonprofit organizations, community leaders in that space who are thinking about the future of children and really looking at how we balance the urgent needs of now toward the future of what we want to see for our children. Start to have a conversation around what decisions do we need to make now to ensure that we will have an equitable future for children.
Okay. Tell me, last thing, we have 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Tell me one grant you've given that you thought has done something very cool on this issue.
You know, we are still in this space of exploring around this issue and this particular space, but I will say this, that when we think about our education work and we think about the tools that are now coming into our schools and looking at the way that AI is being applied, there's innovation in this space that we want to continue to dig under the surface of that and better understand.
All right, amazing. It's very important work. I'm very grateful that you're doing it. Thank you, Alondra.
Thank you.
Oops.
We want to thank the WK Kellogg Foundation for their support of the Atlantic's journalism.
All right.
Please refer
Thank
to
you.
the festival agenda for today's complete schedule. We hope you enjoy your festival experience.